Hi, everybody. So I'm going to start off the next part of the evening by thanking some of the volunteers, well, all of the volunteers, I very much hope, who make this evening possible. But before I do that, I'm looking over at a couple of the volunteers, Elizabeth and David, who I think have pizza left for us. So pizza is now by donation, because we can't claim that it's hot anymore. So vegan pizza by donation, please go and help yourselves, make us an offer. So a big thank you to Elizabeth Asmere Stewart and Donald Stewart, who are on the food over there, to Joseph Krancevic, and Holly Pattison, thank you. Eleanor Calder and Alan McLash, thank you for your help picking up a lot of bits and pieces that we eat and share. Kay Levitt, Blue Braun, and I think that's all. Is there anybody I missed? Except for, I'm coming to you guys, don't worry. So thank you very much to those folks for helping. We have a great volunteer team that come month after month, year after year, and we're like a great big family, and we really, really appreciate our volunteers. And thank you very much to our tweet chat team. We have both a core tweet chat team that come every month and who are really part of having developed Connecting the Docs. Angela Hemming, Caroline Michaels, Mary Lou Wakefield, and Lorena Desiree. Thank you very much to those folks. They're very valuable to Connecting the Docs. Thank you. And we have some volunteers who have joined us for this event. Maureen Bradley, Jordan Reichert, who also known as the Raging Cooching. And thanks to our photographers, Stacey White and Aaron Licht. And a special mention to the folks who were tweeting from afar, who we didn't see, but we heard from on the Twitter sphere. Michelle Goods, Michael Howie, and the Rain Dance Toronto volunteers. I don't think there's anybody I missed there. So also a big thank you to Open Cinema is a program of MediaNet. And MediaNet is a fabulous, eclectic media resource center that offers workshops and equipment rental at incredibly reasonable prices. So if you're getting into filmmaking or already into filmmaking or of any kind of media making, I urge you to connect with them. MediaNet executive director Peter Sandmark. I'm going to be introducing you in a moment to come and moderate, but not quite yet. I'm thanking you first. Kirk and Ellie, who are up swinging wires and making things happen. David Parfit as well. And Caitlin Lewis, who does a lot for Open Cinema. Thank you very much. So a big round of applause to all of those people, please. And we appreciate you coming. Your donations are very important to us, and we appreciate your support and your contribution by being here and sharing in this event. And as we have mentioned, we do have this tweet chat and live stream, and I'm going to invite Carolyn Michaels up, one of our core tweet chat social media engagement team, to just say a few words about what on earth is happening over there online.
And I can speak in over 140 characters. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Carolyn, and it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be behind that bar. And just to tell you a little bit about what we're doing, we're online and in the room. And you can see the screen over here, and what it's doing is following a hashtag which identifies this conversation. Today we're using For the Ghosts. Different events, we use different hashtags. There's a lot of people online and in this room who are in this conversation, and this conversation you can look at later as well. The filmmakers and the photographer you saw who were Skyping with us earlier today have been participating. Liz is Ghosts movie, and so she's been retweeting a lot of the things that we've been talking about in the room today, and so if you want to check out what she has to say and maybe she'll be listening into the panel discussion because that's live streaming for people in Toronto and everywhere else. One of the magical things about connecting the docs and having this multi-city hybrid event and cinematic experience is that it's bringing documentary to this room, to this online room, but also to people in their living rooms, or a gentleman named Tyrell is in Gastown. There's a woman who tweeted a photo of her and her cat because we asked online who has rescued an animal or adopted an animal, and lots of people have lots of stories to tell. So documentary has the power to connect with social media, to bring stories and change people's minds in different ways and on different platforms. So hopefully that helps you understand what we're up to, but it's on Facebook as well. Thanks, Lorena, and everyone to contributing to that conversation where you can have extended characters to engage and learn. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Carolyn. And Carolyn is actually the co-founder of TEDx Victoria, and she's a communications specialist. So we're very, very happy to have her and the other storytellers and digital communicators as part of our team. So we have some door prizes. So Fur Bearers Association for the Protection of Fur-Bearing Animals has offered a couple of fantastic gift bags, one with a t-shirt, one with, well, this one has what's it called? A bag? A tote bag. And a number of other nice items, a sticker, a poster. And Carolyn, perhaps you could be Vanna White and pick the prize. Right, so the last three numbers or something? Oh, the last three numbers are 707. Do we have a 707 for a beautiful tote bag? Nice, thank you. Okay, we have another tote bag, and this one contains a t-shirt and a bumper sticker and a lot of yummy little cute things that relate to the Association of Fur-Bearing Animals. So I'm just going to pick this one. Oh, here she comes, here she comes. The last three numbers of this one are 709. It's rigged. 709. Do we have the last three numbers, 709? 709. 709 going once. Going twice. Okay, one more. 702. Do we have a 702? We do, nice. And we have a couple more gift bags here. These are from the Vegan Fest, the Victoria Vegan Fest. A lovely tote bag, and there's some buttons inside. And here we're going to pick a number. So thank you so much to those two organizations, to 705, this is kind of rigged here, 705. So thank you very much to the Victoria Vegan Fest for supporting this event. And while she's gone, I'm just going to pick the last number for the last tote bag. And the number is 699. 699, do we have a 699 in the house? A 699, we do, yay! Thank you very much to the Association of for the Protection of Fur-Bearing Animals and to Victoria Vegan Fest for that. So now I would like to introduce our moderator for this evening's panel, a very talented musician in his own right and the Executive Director of MediaNet, Peter Sandmark.
Thank you. Okay, let's get our panelists up here. Please join me up on stage while I yak. I can't talk by myself. It's too much. And actually, while they're coming up, what I will do is introduce everybody, starting with, well, here. On my left, vegan and activist since 1990. He's organized hundreds of events over decades promoting animal rights. He's currently organizing the 3rd annual Victoria Vegan Fest. Please welcome David Shishkov. You can talk to him and ask him lots more about the fest and what's going on. Well, you can talk about that. Next to him, a humane education specialist through the National Association for Humane and Environmental Education, graduate from the British Columbia Institute of Technology, involved in the nonprofit sector for over a decade, lobbying various municipalities to adopt anti-trapping bylaws and working with the BC Ministry of Education to have animal issues included in the school curriculum. She's the executive director of the Association for the Protection of Fur-Bearing Animals, Leslie Fox. Last but not least, our UVic law professor, expert in animal law. She's written about the slow pace of animal law reform in Canada compared to the US. Her work's been published in Canada and internationally. She joined the Faculty of Law in 2002, was promoted to associate professor. She held a Fulbright visiting chair in law and society at New York University during the fall 2008. She believes it's time to shift our thinking on the legal status of animals. Please welcome Manisha Dekka. So let's get this mic working, and we'll start perhaps with Manisha and ask each one of our guests open the floor to you 5 minutes, not only to comment on the film and what you've thought about it, but also your own views on non-human animals.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone. It's really nice to be here. I guess I'll just pick off from the film in its, closing moments when it talked about, the need for legal change. That is the faculty I'm in and the work that I do. In addition to my research on kind of animal law reform, I also teach a course called Animals, Culture, and the Law. And the way I approach the issue is to kind of bring together the conversations that have happened about, oppression, injustice, marginalization in academic circles in many disciplines with respect to human issues, and make connections from those theoretical kind of movements like feminist theory, for example, or post-colonial theory, or queer theory, or Marxist struggles, to animals and their situation. So that informs, what I think should happen with respect to animal law reform. And I'll just share with you, about 2 weeks ago, I was in Switzerland at an international animal law conference, where actually some of the individuals featured in the film were also present. And so the conversations there were very illuminating and interesting. And as you may have heard, the United States is getting a lot of attention right now because of the work of the Non-Human Rights Project that is really kind of spearheaded by lawyer Steve Wise. I believe the New York Times Sunday magazine will be featuring the work of his organization, which has been a multi-decade type of kind of ambition for Steve, and which has resulted last year in some litigation in the United States where the lawyers, Steve Wise included, are seeking personhood to be recognized for certain animals. And so that is really a lofty and monumental type of change if it were to occur in the law. And so all credit to I believe should be given to those seeking personhood for animals. But part of the conversations, this is kind of where a lot of animal law scholars would like to see the law reform go. I should maybe back up and say, our system is a common law system. We've inherited it from England, and as opposed to jurisdictions previously colonized by the French, which is a civil law system, like in Quebec. And under the common law system, legally, you're either one of two things. You're either person or property, and animals are all property, right? So as property, any type of object, the table, the water glass, an animal, you are subject to being this object of rights that persons hold. And persons, as we know, can be all of us in this room, and is all of us in this room, human beings, but also corporations, for example. So a huge move in the law would be to elevate animals or move them from the property category to the personhood category. And you can see from this film why so many advocates in law and non-law seek that remedy. What I was arguing at that conference was that, definitely animals should not be property in law. But perhaps what we don't need is kind of a shift over to the personhood side either. And this is where, my critical theoretical interests in issues of like sexism, racism, and struggles against that come to bear in thinking about animals and what type of law reform should be advocated for. Because if you look at personhood as a legal concept in terms of its historical genesis, its current imprint, its current manifestations, I believe there's a strong argument to say that it's very much an anthropocentric concept. And you kind of see that resonating in the work of the Non-Human Rights Project, or even in some of the comments that we hear about, why animals matter. And so when we, value animals for their higher cognitive processes, for example, right? And we can understand why campaigns and litigation would center around dolphins or orcas or chimpanzees for legal personhood, as the current litigation does. It leaves out, though, right, all those animals that don't make that cognitive cut, right? And it's not clear that if we seek personhood for chimpanzees today, for example, as meaningful and as liberatory that would be for chimpanzees, that any other type of animal that, we don't see as sufficiently human, we don't give honorary human status to, would also be embraced by the law and have their status ameliorated. So that's just kind of a sampling of where some of the conversations are right now in animal law scholarship about how to reform. I think a baseline point, though, for many is that an incremental type of legal reform won't, stop all these, the different types of exploitation we see on the film. So it's not enough to tweak, let's say, anti-cruelty legislation or to, work on like industry codes for farm animals, but rather what's needed is an abolition, is a change of the property status, right? So not everyone agrees with that in animal ethics, but in terms of those interested kind of in critical perspectives, as I am brought to bear on animal law, this would be a baseline. So that's some of how I approach these issues.
Thank you very much, Manisha. Let's pass it on to Leslie. Fantastic, right to the target, abolition. Leslie, we'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Peter. My name is Leslie Fox. I work currently as the Executive Director for the Association for the Protection of Fur-Bearing Animals. It's kind of a long-winded name, so people call us fur bearers or fur bearer defenders. We're all the same group. Our mandate is to educate people about the commercial fur trade and to provide opportunities to coexist with wildlife. So that's kind of our focus, but obviously we care about all animals. For myself, this is the second time seeing Ghosts in Our Machine, and I think it's a really great film in that it's refreshing because it's not as graphic as some of the films that I think most people are often worried about coming to see, and just because it is such a sensitive subject for many people, and these are images that aren't easy for us to watch. So Ghost in Our Machine, I think it's great. It's got a real easy way about it in terms of being able to connect with the protagonist, Joanne MacArthur, and it opens up a lot of discussion and a lot of opportunities for critical thinking, which I think are important. In my history, I've been an animal activist, I guess you could say, for most of my life. When I was a teenager, it kind of started to manifest in it's with me to this day. So early on in my career, I took on issues regarding dissection, specifically dissection in schools at a high school level. I also took on my city council. I'm from Ontario originally, and we got the circus banned. So that was a great achievement, except unfortunately it was overturned, and there was a lot of issues about jurisdiction and legal jargon. But I do still count it as a victory. We were really, really happy with that. And coming here to Vancouver, wildlife has been near and dear to my heart, and just learning how animals are trapped in conibear leg hold and snare traps, and looking at the fur trade, it's still a problem. I think many people think that, fur is something that is one of those issues that's, long gone, and we don't really talk about it so much anymore. But unfortunately, there's a whole new generation that we have to educate, and I think we can't get lazy with our activism, that we constantly have to keep talking to new generations of people that maybe didn't get the same messages that we did when we grew up and went to school and with our peers and such. So I'm really happy to be here tonight, and I'm really thankful for all of you here that are joining us in Victoria, and all of you maybe joining us online. Thank you so much for participating in the discussion, and this is definitely the first step forward to change. So thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. And I'll turn the mic over to David. Maybe you want to talk about the Victoria Vegan Fest.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, there's a bunch of vegan stuff in the city, if you're not aware already. One thing is there's a big event, the Victoria Vegan Fest. It's on Canada Day. That's July 1st in Market Square here in downtown Victoria. And it's a big celebration of veganism and education. We have speakers, we have cooking classes. We have a number of vegan vendors here giving out samples of vegan food and showing all the different vegan products you can buy out there. There's nonprofits there as well that promote a vegan message or a message that aligns with what we're up to. So that's Canada Day in Market Square, and we have a poster there. You can sign up for our emails. And I also run another project called the Victoria Vegan, which is just an online resource of what's going on in Victoria, the different places you can shop, commentary on activism, and a few different campaigns. We've been working hard to try and prevent the slaughter of deer in Oak Bay. That's been a big issue that we've been working on. We printed up 5,000 booklets and have distributed them to most of the households in Oak Bay just through volunteers, which is pretty incredible. And then we've also got a campaign to try and ban the horse-drawn carriages here in the city, and you're welcome to ask about that later. As well as just general vegan promotion, giving out vegan booklets, and getting people to think about their relationship with other animals. And that's something, I think, that's the message that I got out of the film, of course, is we need to examine, what is our interaction with other animals? And if they're on our plates, does that really align with what we believe? Most of us would probably not want to hurt animals if we had the choice. And we do have that choice when we shop for our food, when we buy our products. All these things are something that each one of us can make a difference in and have a positive effect on. So, these are things that I try to get people to think about. Also, I promote veganism through sport. I run a little organization called Organic Athlete Victoria, and we've got bikers and runners and triathletes and other sports people that are out promoting veganism and showing that you can be vegan and a competitive athlete as well. And so I'm a bike racer and pretty well known around the city and out at the velodrome and riding around on my bike. So those are some of the things I'm up to. I also want to thank, we have a couple volunteers tonight that were participating on Twitter and Facebook, and that's Diana and Mike over there. And I just want to say a big thank you for coming out tonight and being a part of this. And yeah, I guess we'll talk about more stuff later.
Thank you, David. And so is there something going on this weekend at the Vegan?
Oh, right, yes, sorry. So we have a fundraiser event for the Vegan Fest, and that's a big vegan bake sale. So you can find out what are some vegan options, and it's in Market Square in Green Cuisine. I don't know if you're familiar with the restaurant in there, but it's just in the center of Market Square, and they've been very generous in allowing us to use their room to have a bake sale, which is kind of ironic. We're having a bake sale in a restaurant. Yeah, Andy's a big supporter. He's the owner of the restaurant. He's a big supporter of the Vegan Fest. And so we'll be in there, and that's 12 till 4 this Saturday in Green Cuisine in Market Square. And there's a poster there as well. And you can sign up and get reminders of the stuff we're up to just on the table there.
So these things can people just take pamphlets from the table?
Yeah, there's vegan starter guides. They can grab them. No, we're not collecting any donations tonight.
It's free, folks.
It's all free. Yeah.
Hey, please help yourselves on your way out. And of course, we're going to open it up. It's a discussion. We're going to invite comments and questions. We did put out a thing. We try to create a safe space for discussion. This is there's a wide spectrum of views, I think, we're going to get on. It's not black and white. So in order to allow people to feel safe, please be respectful in your comments and so on. And also we have, of course, a lot of people engaging the discussion and the issue online. And if you want to, certainly feel free to make your comments by Twitter, or send a question, or if there's comments and questions from the Twitter sphere, please yell to us and wave your arms frantically. And we have also David on the roaming mic, so he'll get you just have to wave your arms frantically towards me, and I'll get his attention. So let's kick things off, though. Think for yourselves if they have comments about the films or questions, but I think you've already raised a lot of really interesting issues, like one, the idea of activism, or in other words, raising awareness for people, but also the choice, the power of consumer choice, and then the abolition. I mean, it's sort of like we're in a situation where it's like, I choose not to be a slave owner. Yes, slavery is legal, but I'm not going to be a slave owner, and then we're going to act, and we're going to protest and try and encourage other people, as opposed to a legal decision where you say, well, this is simply wrong. So I don't know. This is a wide range, and it feels like. Do you feel? Does anyone want to take on this question? Is there? I have this feeling that there's a turning point. That some things have happened lately. We've seen protests against marine parks, and people are starting to say this is wrong. I can't go in and watch captive animals and things like that. Any comments on that? Like, is there some change happening in public opinion that's going to precipitate a larger change? Leslie?
Oh, I'm sure we all have something to comment on that. I think for me personally, I think the inconvenient truth. I think going back a little bit to when climate change really became the focus, and I think that film just kind of elevated the issue. And then we saw sort of a movement towards natural health, natural products, buying local, organic, and just sort of this whole kind of new concept, this new way of living. And I think that really opens the door for just intelligence, I guess, and critical thinking. So learning where our food comes from, farmers markets, like just this kind of reconnection, if you will, of just what we are doing, what we're buying in, and how our choices affect the environment, affect other people. And I think animals are starting to now really creep up into that concept, for people, and so I feel really encouraged by that. And certainly, I think Blackfish, the documentary that takes a really critical look at SeaWorld, has just received a lot of acclaim and is really widespread and has got people talking. And now we're looking at, there's been actions in California now against SeaWorld, and we're seeing that spill over here in Vancouver. Where I live, there's the Vancouver Aquarium now is come under fire from people within the city, and from also residents who are now wondering if it's okay to keep whales in captivity. So it's an exciting time, and the time is right, and we're way overdue.
The other thing I was thinking of, though, is that the farm. They were talking about the farming industry, or that this is a major thing, and it's kind of hidden. I mean, SeaWorld and these things are tourist attractions. They're promoted. People are drawn to go look at them and stuff. They don't want us to look at the factory farmed animals. And I think that this film, shows it. There's been a few other films like Food Inc. and I don't think we showed that one, did we, man? But anyway, it's other films like that have shown this sort of, and actually, it's hard to see it, but. Is that what it takes to get the public to pay attention to? I thought I was surprised to see the killing footage where they were taking a cow. I was surprised. I thought that must have been smuggled out somehow. I don't think that's footage that they want you to see. Is the systematic process for killing animals. But is this the next step in raising awareness about it, or? I don't know. How do you get to... Who wants to take that on? Sorry. I'm just thinking out loud here. I didn't mean to actually put you on the spot.
It's hard for me because I've been vegan for so long that the way I see these things is, I think, radically different from a lot of other people. So it's hard. It's actually hard for me to think the way perhaps most people would, and to relate to that kind of thing. For me, it's really as simple as I don't want to hurt animals. And so I make the choices in my life that minimize or eliminate that. And something like SeaWorld is just deplorable. It doesn't really show what's going on with animals. If you go to a place like that, or just imagine aliens came to Earth and took a human and put him in a little cage and then watched him or her. And what would that, and then based their entire judgment on the human race on this one person trapped in a cage. Now, would they really be gaining any real information about the human species by doing this? Probably not. But it says something about these aliens, that they just come and take someone and treat them like that. And it's the exact same thing with us, that we would take any animal, an orca, a seal, a fish, and keep them in captivity, to imprison them, and consider that education and describe it that way. But is it really education? I think the education that we get from this is that we as a species have a long way to go in how we treat our fellow earthlings. And so that's what I get out of it when I see those things. And I'm hoping that more and more people are starting to get that message. And movies like Blackfish and other things that are coming up are getting people to question those relationships.
I think also the Cove with dolphins in Japan was a big eye-opener. Manisha, let's talk about personhood, because obviously you couldn't do this if you couldn't capture animals, and especially all the wild ones. They have to be captured. They're not factory farmed like dolphins, or I guess they try and do it, but they have to be captured and enslaved, like put into. So personhood. How would that work if that happened? Give us a vision.
Well, so, this great divide we have in the common law between property and persons means really that the law can't see, can't take any cognition itself of the interest of whatever is categorized as property, whether that's a tree, whether that's an animal, or something we may think does not have any interest, like a chair. So what the law can take, cognizance of are the competing rights claims among persons. So that's why, any type of lawsuit is going to be between parties that are recognized to be legal persons. And so we can have persons disputing over the fate of an animal, but there won't be any legal regard for that animal herself in that claim. So that's why it's, legal to do these things to animals, whether it's like put an animal in captivity for whatever purpose. If there was personhood for animals, what personhood signals in the law is, the rights that we associate with, for example, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom. So these classic first-generation civil and political rights, like the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to security of the person. All those rights for us as humans in Canada are enshrined under Section 7 of our Charter. So, for example, if animals are persons, there may be similar types of kind of rights that shield animals from non-instrumental use. So that's kind of the potential of personhood. It's really to be a shield against an instrumental use. So right now we wouldn't let human beings treat other humans in a certain way because they're persons, right? You can't, it's a Kantian idea that you can't be merely an end to someone else, merely a means rather to someone else's end. So personhood has that kind of block against that type of treatment. So that's why so many abolitionists against property seek personhood as the alternative. One, because that's what the alternative is in law right now. But secondly, what it connotes is this block against instrumental treatment.
Just to follow it up, but the thing is, if people continue, choose to eat animals, so if the animal is given personhood, under what legal regime would they be allowed to kill it and then eat it?
Yes, this is so interesting because I was just giving a talk to middle schoolers yesterday out in Souk, and this question came up. We were talking about the limits of anti-cruelty legislation, and this was basically the same question. So there wouldn't be any scope to do that, right? It's like you cannot kill another human being and eat them, right? So you could not kill another animal and eat them. There may be, depending what we think about different communities and access to, sustenance and all of that, these interests, there could be an exception to a general legal rule, like there are in many different areas. But the kind of default rule would be, this is what personhood means, right? It means you cannot violate certain rights because certain things don't go into a balancing act of like a utilitarian calculus of, benefits and disadvantages. Rather, no matter how advantageous it would be for somebody to continue eating animals for their own sense of well-being or psychologically, we would have to say no to that desire because of the personal interests of animals.
If you don't mind, I'm going to throw up a current pop thing. It was Ellen who tweeted,
Yes.
about the seal slaughter, and then there was a reaction from the north. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact details, but the idea is the suggestion was that some people up north, there's not much else to eat, and it's part of their tradition and stuff. So I mean, that would be a counter argument to this notion of personhood. There'd be tradition, there'd be culture. I guess, like, where does it go from here towards the person? Are there gray zones or stages, or how would you accommodate those kinds of reactions? It's a tough one.
I don't want to consume all the airtime here, so if someone wants to jump in, but I'm happy to answer it as well.
Like, you're probably familiar with the case, like, or this. It was a story, and
Yeah, it's the way I approach it is I'm a seal activist. I'm an activist for seals, and I want to represent their interests. So I come at it like there's different perspectives. There's those when it comes to the seal hunt, there are those who are separate the commercial seal hunt from sustenance hunting. And so, they try to be very explicit that they're not opposed to what the Inuit are doing, but it's the commercial seal hunt. It's what's going on in Newfoundland, what they're doing on the ice floes. It's not sort of the day-to-day Inuit seal hunting. Myself, I take a different approach that I'm a seal activist, and so I don't think seals should be killed for any purpose. Just like human rights activists wouldn't think that humans shouldn't be killed for any purpose or murdered. So that's my perspective, and it is really tricky because there may be people who do depend on seals. At this point, I wouldn't make a big stink about the issue. There's certainly other things we can focus on and other steps we can take, but when it gets to the heart of the matter, I think the seals need a voice as well, and we need to try and find a balance there if we can. And hopefully it doesn't mean killing seals. Maybe it's possible that people there really don't, or some anyway, don't want to actually be reliant on seals, and maybe we can empower them to provide something different for them. I don't know what that is. That's not my real field, but that's the best twist I can put on it and the best way I can present it. I would love to see an education program about respecting other creatures and people, other animals, because we're animals as well, and seeing if that would be something that people who are reliant on seals would be interested in. It's and that, I don't know. It's really tough. It's not an easy subject.
I'll just add a few things to that. So, one issue to consider, like in that whole Ellen DeGeneres selfie controversy around this, her support for the Humane Society, right, which then led to the Humane Society being one of the supporters against the seal hunt, is to consider, issues involving First Nations should perhaps be thought about in terms of nation-to-nation governance. So if we really believe in the sovereignty or self-determination of Indigenous peoples, as I believe we should, then there's not one view in Indigenous community about how to govern itself, right? So there are people who would support, the continued traditional subsistence practices of hunting, fishing, of whichever animals, but there might also be people who would have different views about how the community should go forward. And, so my view is that I think part of a belief in self-government is to let those conversations happen among those individuals who are affected, right, who are in that community. So the kind of the second issue I wanted to add on to that is that it's so interesting to me, as you know, if you think of Ellen, what did she support exactly? Like, I don't know the whole details of the Oscars and all of that, but I believe the money that came out of her Twitter selfie went to the Humane Society, right? And so there's lots of things that the Humane Society of the United States does other than the seal hunt. And the kind of media attention gets kind of attracted to what is most like kind of contentious in animal advocacy, rather than going to, either Dave was saying the commercial seal industry or just other industries that the Humane Society targets. I just wanted to add, that also happens in like the legal conversations about these issues. So if you think of our Canadian Criminal Code, that is the federal legislation that contains really the area of law where there's the most attention to animals, and even there, it's, in my opinion, it's very tepid, is anti-cruelty legislation, right? So we have provisions in our criminal code that say we should not be cruel to animals. Yet we know we have all these industries that go on like this, but yet, so that's a contradiction that I'm happy to explain in another question. But the last time that the anti-cruelty legislation, which is more than centuries old, was revised considerably was a few years ago now, in 2008, after a lot of advocacy to get certain reforms in, some of which came in, some of which didn't. But there's a really interesting article, I believe, by John Sorensen at Brock University, published in Social and Legal Studies several years ago, tracking the parliamentary debates about the proposed reforms, right? And one of the issues that came up was what would be the impact on something that's not really impacted by the scope of anti-cruelty legislation, constitutional rights for Indigenous peoples, which are Section 35 rights in the Constitution. And so you kind of see, in my view, and in Sorensen's view, what he was arguing from my reading, is like a hijacking of the animal kind of advocacy law reform initiatives by, I believe, as he wrote about it, largely conservative politicians who are eager to kind of have the bill die.
So just to follow up on this thought, and please, anyone has comments or just get David to get you the mic. But what I'm thinking about here is you've got the anti-cruelty legislation, which opens the door. Like, in other words, if we're talking about the what's the right term? The farming, the factory farming. That's what I'm looking for. That would seem to be cruel. The film, I think, shows us cruelty. It takes us into the, as someone put it in a tweet, thank you, sentience of the eyes of the animals, and we see their, living, thinking, emoting creatures. And so to be locked up in cages and stuff is cruel. So a slight extension of the anti-cruelty legislation would open a door to changing practices. Is that not possible if it's already that? I'm sorry, or anyone else. Where next? I'm looking at in terms of change. Where next? Where does this change happen?
It would have. So in my view, it would be more than a slight change of anti-cruelty legislation. It would be a fundamental reworking of anti-cruelty legislation. Basically, anti-cruelty legislation started in Britain, right? And what we've inherited is legislation that's premised again on human interests, right? So the genesis of anti-cruelty legislation was that if we were kind to animals, we'd be kind to each other, right? And that's the primary rationale. Okay, so law is all about definition, and if you look at the wording of anti-cruelty legislation, whether it's at the federal level in the criminal code or at the provincial territorial level in anti-cruelty statutes, the wording is all the catch-all generic category for cruelty is all about what is unnecessarily cruel or what is undue hardship, right? So these are adjectives that have to be interpreted by the people who are going to enforce the act, right? So let's say the Societies for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals or the police with the criminal code, and if it goes to trial, by judges. And if you look at the limited legal decisions that have been rendered over the years in this area of law, as I have in Canada, and then others have in other jurisdictions and made a similar argument, which my work has been inspired by, it's that the definition of unnecessary, or words like unnecessary, really correlates with human interests, such that almost every normalized, routine, industrial use of animals that the majoritarian society accepts is never seen to be unnecessary or cruel. No matter how much, let's say on an objective basis, we watch a film and see what's going on, people would say, oh my gosh, that's shocking or cruel. So basically, if it's an industry practice, either in the research community or the farming community or the entertainment community, it's seen to be necessary. And in fact, it never even it rarely, I should say, hits the radar and comes under the purview of anti-cruelty prosecution because it's just normalized and routine. So it's really only those aberrant practices or uses of animals, someone putting their cat in the microwave or someone dragging their dog behind a truck, that the majoritarian society does not accept, that gets labeled as cruel and is a subject of prosecution under this legislation.
So let's give it to Leslie and bring up the fur, because the myth of Canada, in the Hudson's Bay and the fur trapping. So it seems like, we're just catching wild animals, and yet the film showed us factory fur farming. So is there a turning point there, or how do you approach that in activism?
Loaded question. I think I know where you're going. So the good news, I guess, when looking at the fur trade, and certainly Canada was built on the fur trade, that's no secret. And we traded those furs with Europeans, and that's basically the very first business in Canada was the Hudson's Bay Company, which is the fur trade. So we definitely know our history, but moving forward, I think a lot of people would argue that fur is a commodity that's no longer necessary, and it's a frivolous luxury item that in many cases we don't need. So in the 1980s, there was some pretty heavy campaigning by large animal rights organizations, and the pinnacle of sort of fur kind of just crumbled. And but now we are seeing a bit of resurgence, mostly in countries like China and Russia. They have a pretty unending appetite, unfortunately, for fur. Here in Canada, about 3.5 million animals are killed for their fur. 700,000 are trapped, and the remainder, the 2.5 million there, are on fur farms. And so you see, actually, when you look at the numbers from Stats Canada, there is a strong decrease in wild, what they call wild fur. So that would be animals like wolves, coyotes, beaver, lynx. So the animals not raised on fur farms. So then those numbers are declining. I think the high was probably in the early 80s, which is about 5 million, and then today it's down to 700,000. So it's great news. Except now what we're seeing is an increase, though, in fur farming, and the numbers have never been higher. In fur farms, it's fox and mink are the two animals. There's some chinchilla farming and rabbit farming, but the majority of fur in Canada is fox and mink. And for me, I think no matter what, you could argue for bigger cages, you could argue for more enrichment, and the industry will say that, and they'll say they have the highest standards and all this other rhetoric. But what makes it's so heartbreaking, I think, for me, is when you understand the basic biology and needs of a fox. They like to dig, they like to make dens, they travel long distances, they're such amazing and curious animals, and to confine them in a wire cage is really just taking away everything that they live for. And minks are a semi-aquatic species, and they spend over 60% of their time in the water. So you see, here you have an animal that is meant and genetically built to be living in the water, to be diving, to be searching for food, and again, 60% of their time in the water, and they're in a cage. And it's just, again, something for a product that no one needs.
Yeah, question here. Thank you.
Happy to tell you. So the majority of fur farms are in Nova Scotia. Overwhelmingly, 2 million minks alone are in Nova Scotia. And the reason for that is, well, partially because the Maritimes have a hard time with just industry in general, and the economy there isn't strong, and so it's really heavy agriculture. It's also tied with the fishing industry, so a lot of the fish byproduct meal is fed to mink farming, so they work in tandem. So it's really unfortunate. In BC, I think there's probably maybe about a dozen fur farms. Most of them are out in the Fraser Valley, and I would say Ontario, Quebec have quite a few fur farms. In terms of trapping, you're looking at Ontario, Quebec would trap the most. BC, I think we do about 30,000 animals are trapped every year. So it's, and one thing too to remember is a leg hold trap is legal. I don't know how, everywhere I go, everyone says to me, isn't it banned? Wasn't it banned 20 years ago? Or most people think it's up north in the middle of nowhere. And again, it couldn't be further from the truth. Under the law, you can set a leg hold trap 200 meters from a dwelling. That's how close they are. And many communities, you can trap, many municipalities contract trappers to kill animals like beavers. So it's so close to home. It really is an issue that we need to be paying attention to.
Yes, another question here. Yeah, I'll just keep talking while you get there with the mic. Thank you very much. Let's have a hand for David Parfit. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, that's enough. That's enough. Don't get too carried away.
So, as a newbie to Canada and a new citizen, I'm so disheartened to hear about outdoors here. I'm from the UK.
Yeah.
And what can we do about it? What's the positive action?
To law?
To law, to just making change, but probably through law.
Okay, so we'll turn it over to our legal expert.
It's really creating political will, right? So there are two sources of law, overwhelmingly: judge-made law, the common law, or legislation. And so we may feel that we have little influence over controlling how a judge decides, but we have more influence over creating political will. So it would be just, doing the activism, doing the advocacy. I mean, part of the reason I, go into schools and give this message is because that's like the next generation of children, of adults, right? And so I think that type of work is really important as well. But writing your MP it sounds cliche, but it can get some type of attention.
And I'll add to that, and then I'll give it to Dave, because I think we all have lots of ideas on what to do. One of the things that I found, we've dabbled in law. We're an advocacy organization, and so we've had campaigns that target municipal, provincial, federal. And for me personally, the frustration dealing with federal and provincial, it just puts you in tears. The form letters, being ignored, feeling like you're not going anywhere. It's really, really discouraging. And so one of the things I encourage people to do is municipal law. There's a lot you can get done with bylaws. And these are people that you can talk to on the phone, you can have coffee with, you can actually get a response from a city councillor a lot easier and quicker than you ever will with a province or on a federal level. And you can use your city councillor as leverage to maybe connect with someone in the province that's a little higher up and that type of a thing. But bylaws, examples of bylaws, I know off the top of my head, we've done quite a few with trapping, encouraging municipalities to prohibit the use of body gripping traps in favor of non-lethal ways of managing wildlife. Other jurisdictions have banned exotic animals. They have outlawed chaining dogs in the backyard. There's different restrictions and codes of practice and things that you can do in a municipality. School boards is another one. In Vancouver, Kelowna, and Toronto, I lobbied for a student choice policy for dissection. So the school board formally adopted a policy that meant any student, any high school student within that district, if they spoke out against dissection, they would be provided a non-lethal alternative, a non-animal specimen. So things like that, the boards, policies, municipal, start in your own backyard. That's where it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, locally we're trying to ban the horse-drawn carriages. And so, we've been pressuring City Hall to do that. So there are certainly, issues like that you can take on. But it's important to remember that the laws, if you're talking like big laws, like big changes, the laws typically, I think, follow the population. And so it really starts from the ground up, and that people really need to start changing the way that they feel about an issue. And then the laws begin to follow the way the population thinks. I don't think you can really lead with law, changing the law, and then everyone has to follow along. Whenever they force things in, it often ends poorly. So there's that. But you also got to be careful when you do pressure for things that you aren't compromising your own message. A really good example is 10, 15 years ago when we talked about the way chickens were raised. There's two different chickens. There's the ones raised for eggs and the ones raised for meat. The ones raised for eggs are kept in little cages. The ones raised for meat are kept in big open barns. And activists at that time opposed both equally. It was all wrong. And stop using chickens for these things. There's been a big movement for cage-free eggs, which really ends up putting them sort of in the same situation as the way that chickens raised for egg or for meat, is raised. And so it's kind of hard now for activists, at least on a large scale, to say, hey, we're opposed to the way chickens are raised for meat, because you're actually advocating for chickens raised for eggs to be used the same way, and you get into these weird sticky situations. So often you really got to think about whether the reform of the law that you're asking for is really what you're asking, is really what you want. For me, if I want an orange, I'm not going to ask for apples. I'm going to ask for an orange. And if I ask for apples, am I ever going to get an orange? Probably not. So I think when it comes to that sort of activism, it's really important to ask for what you want. And so if all you want is bigger cages, okay, well, you can do that, or no cages, okay. But is that really what we want to see? Is that the future we want? And if not, then let's work towards what we actually want to see, which would be an end to captivity entirely. So that's my perspective on that.
Well, it's great. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, we have one right there. Thank you.
Elections are important for getting people who will pass better laws. And I totally understand what you're saying, David, that law is always a compromise, especially under capitalism. The Social Environmental Alliance in Victoria is running animal rights activists this November for municipal positions throughout the CRD. About the book Beyond Beef, it mentioned that capitalism itself has its derivative in the word capita, which I think came from the status of cows, the heads of cows, and what that reflected to the early capitalists. Do you have any feedback about that? And if that is accurate, because capitalism is a system based on private property, it suggests we have to have a socialist system before we can really tackle animal liberation.
I think you're right. The stock market term comes from stock.
Yeah, it sounds about right. All I can say really about that topic is on capitalism is that capitalism really depends on losers, and there always has to be losers in order for capitalism to thrive. And so I'm not that crazy about capitalism, but that's all I really have to say about the subject.
Do you want to comment on that?
Other comments? So, I don't know, can take, yes, a question from the Twitters, from a person.
What is it, Twitter?
It is.
All right. Who's tweeting?
A Twitter with a question. But I don't know what the question is. What is going on in Oak Bay with the deer?
Oh.
I mean, I asked that, and then I think, yeah, but I mean, is that really that much more pressing than what's going on in the supermarkets? But
Absolutely.
But anyhow, and thank you for handing out all those flyers. That's great. But yeah, do you know what's actually happening?
I can tell you what we've been doing. I don't know what Oak Bay City Council is actually doing. I can tell you. We've noticed, one of our main complaints is we isolated where deer are being hit by cars. And this is the CRD's own map from their deer management strategy, which was this. It was a horrible program that they organized, but they produced a map showing where all the deer collisions are occurring. And if you look in Oak Bay and just isolate Oak Bay, it's blatantly clear where it happens. It's just the stretch of Cadborough Bay Road right by the Uplands Golf Course. You look, there's nowhere else in Oak Bay that deer are being hit, just that one single stretch. And that's the one stretch in Oak Bay that the speed limit's over 50, or is 50, sorry, it's over 40, and it's under 40 or under everywhere else. And of course deer are being hit there. We bought a speed sensor like for sports, and just to see how fast cars were going by there. They're going 50, 60, 70 or more. So we started targeting that area, and we've been doing demonstrations, holding up signs, encouraging people to slow down and be aware that deer are crossing there, and that's where they're being hit. So we targeted that specifically, and then we've seen that Oak Bay is now, after several months of us saying this is where it's happening, resending them this map, showing them where in their own municipality that it's happening, they're actually starting to do something. They set up a speed sensor. One thing that we noticed, we'd be out there for 3 hours holding our signs on the road, and we wouldn't see a single police car go by. And this is at rush hour. This is like 4 to 6 or 4 to 7. And not a single police car would go by, and all these cars are speeding by. So we found out that we complained to the city, we complained to the Oak Bay Police, and they actually started stopping people there. One of our activists got reported back that they've been stopping people going 60 and 70 or more than 70. A motorcycle was going like 90 along there. So this is something that they're actually starting to realize after our pressure. But if you want to stay in touch with this stuff, I run a group called the Greater Victoria Deer Advocates. We have a discussion group on Facebook. You're welcome to join that. That's what I can say is going on. And then with the booklets, that was an educational effort to get people going. And Fur Bearers also co-sponsored it and co-wrote the booklet. And I got a lot of positive feedback from that. A few crazy people called too, but I think that's been a really effective effort.
Sensitization to the animals that are in our proximity. I mean, they're wild right there. I had one more question here because, yes, go ahead. We'll have another question from the...
Just on the topic of the deer issue as well, I think in the context of what we're talking about, as it being, as you mentioned, seems like the deer in Oak Bay, is that really the same sort of issue as what's going on with the factory farming of fur and animals for meat and so on? Is deer are being targeted all over North America right now, and beyond possibly, but there's a concerted effort by, I think in November on the front cover of Time magazine, it said America's New Pest, and promoted, basically it was a big advertisement by the pro-hunting lobby down there to promote, we need to kill deer, we need to round them up and everywhere they're seen, and this has been going on all over the States, and they're now trying to bring that to Canada and BC specifically right now. And when we talk about it in the context of capitalism, that there is money driving these interests, right? There is money behind these lobby groups that are interested in seeing animals murdered and framing them as pests, framing them as nuisances. And just the same, every time you pick up a newspaper or turn on the radio, and these every time you see and hear the, I guess, exaggerated way that the deer are talked about, as if it's the zombie plague coming to wipe everybody out, that also is in the context of selling papers, right? And getting viewers or getting listeners, right? To pay attention, to engage, right? So it's all made up in a lot of ways. as a lot darker and scarier than it really is when it's just deers and does and, you know, eating some plants and mostly taking the brunt.
Flowers,
flowers. But, you know, also taking the brunt of being killed on a regular basis by cars, right? When we still haven't had a single human fatality from a deer in BC. So.
Well, I think we'll get close to wrapping up here if you think about your last questions, but I want to bring it back to the film again and ask if you have some comments in terms of the effectiveness of this kind of, I think the film for me really underlined the power of imagery to move us and to make us to shift. And I think that's her whole purpose, using photography. Any thoughts about that, or how you guys see that in your own work, like as a tool or as a process?
Yes, I think the visual medium is very powerful in that way. I do think it is necessary to do these types of educational initiatives in the public, and it's far more powerful than what like even legal change can do. Just to go back to an earlier comment, Dave, that I think you were making, law is inherently conservative, right? And it really, just because, let's say, animals become persons, that doesn't mean that they're going to be treated well. It may mean that certain things are illegal, but it doesn't mean that there will be, beautiful life for all animals immediately. It's because the culture has to change along with it, and perhaps preliminary, and visual medium is really good for that. I'll just add, though, if we think about like all the stories we tell about why humans are at the top, why humans are unique, why are we exceptional, that so many like biological characteristics come into play for different rationales, whether it's like language, cognition, a soul, tool use, whatever, all these shifting rationales. One insight that I've read about is how, in terms of our senses, we associate humans with the visual, right? And animals are associated really with sense that we don't see so heightened in ourselves, like olfactory senses, right? And so if you think of certain films that play, for example, The Silence of the Lambs, that play on the sense of human versus non-human, and who can like smell well and who can see well, that the seeing, the visual, is really correlated with the human. So while yes, the visual is important, I would just invite us to think even critically about how we privilege certain senses and what we see as important.
That's a good comment.
Leslie, thoughts? Final thoughts?
Sure, final thoughts. I think what I liked about the film was the use of the micro, right? So the zooming in, the eyelashes, the eye movements. You can almost really see the texture of the fur, and there was a certain intimacy, I think, that film really brings when we meet different types of animals through the protagonist, Joanne MacArthur. And I really like it. I like that the film came from the perspective of Joanne, and it's a nice way to kind of frame it and her connection with animals and her story and her journey, and it makes it a little easier, I think, from a viewer. You kind of go along this journey with her as opposed to just show these typical shots of just what is bad, and I think that turns a lot of people off. So it's nice to know, and it just feels good. It feels good to know that there's someone out there like Joanne, and there's filmmakers out there like Liz Marshall that think what I think, and just those connections. And again, I think just the critical thinking aspect of it is really, really important. And I know that film's been really well received, and it's so great. And we're so thankful to be part of this event and Open Cinema for doing this.
It's a really good point that she also balanced the sort of positive experiences with animals, and which she drew us into for herself, like Joanne hugging a cow.
Yeah, the farm sanctuary was a nice balance to it, and putting animals in a proper context, and you see them in a proper context, and yeah, that was really enjoyable.
So there's an argument for free-range chickens there. Anyway, David, closing thoughts.
there's one story that I heard that's really been profound in how I see things, and that's just how veganism came about. And so the term was coined in 1944 by someone called Donald Watson in the UK. And at that time, there were only family farms. There were no factory farms. But and at that time, vegetarianism was losing its potency in the sense that people were starting to include dairy and eggs and these things, and we started seeing terms like lacto-ovo-vegetarian, and I fear the day that we might see lacto-ovo-vegan or something like that. It's horrible, but it could happen the way that some groups are acting. But yeah, so there were no factory farms back then, but even just looking at what was occurring then, the family farms, it was still obvious that it was wrong to keep animals in captivity like that, and to put uses on them, that the pig is used for meat, and this cow is used for dairy, and this chicken is used for eggs, and this other one we're going to eat. And yeah, so it's important to not even say factory farms, because that's not the end of the road. Even if we got rid of all factory farms tomorrow, there's still the worst family farms that are going to be out there. There's always going to be another worse situation when you're using animals and keeping them in captivity. And so it's really important to sort of, I think, to stay away from, and not necessarily focus on factory farms, but farming in general, captivity in general, animal use and exploitation. Those are the real problems and the mentalities that are behind them. And that's why veganism came about in 1944, is because these things weren't being addressed properly. And so veganism was an attempt to make this the actual focus of the issue, and it's being lost now too. But I try to promote the spirit of veganism and where it came from, and respect that.
Thank you, and you'll be able to enjoy the veganism this weekend at the bake sale at Market Square. So make sure and be there between noon and 12. So, folks, I think we've covered a lot of territory. We can't do it all tonight. We can't solve it all. But let's have a warm round of applause for our guests for coming here tonight. But it's not over. Here with our sponsor, Global Village. Mandy, do you want to tell us what we have for the contestants?
So thank you so much, and thank you to Peter for moderating. We have a couple of gifts, or a gift for each of you, from our sponsor, Global Village Store, and we don't know what's in there. We hope it's something that's lovely and useful, and contains no meat products. I don't think
there's any animals.
No, I know, but I'm just sort of sensitized to it now.
It's a surprise.
So thank you so much for coming out, for informing our discussion here tonight. Thank you to Peter, and thank you, all of you, both in the room and virtually, for being part of this amazing day for the ghosts. So thanks so much, and we hope to see you at our Season 11 finale and fundraiser on May 14th. There's some handbills on the table and lots of information about all of the topics and organizations that we've been hearing about tonight on the table here as you go out. So thanks so much, and good night.
Thank you.
The Ellen thing, I had to bring that up. It was
A seal fee.
well, because it's like sort of brings up the two sides of it. I think it was the money came from Samsung. I think that was her, because the phone was. Each tweet was $1.